All right, on this episode of Bowks Talking Bouts, excited to be talking to an individual who's currently one half of the PWG Tag Team Champions, the leader of the House of Black. He's been a pro wrestler for 20 years and very happy to be welcoming Malakai Black onto the show for the very first time. How's your day going so far there, man?
Hey man, what's up? So the day's been pretty hectic. I was just having this conversation with my physical trainer and with my wife, and actually with my driver. This was a week where I was in multiple states, multiple countries in the span of 7 days, 6 flights, 3 matches, 2 meet and greets, and television tapings, 7 workouts, 2 training sessions, and here we are prepping while doing this interview for the next training session, and having a blast doing so, feeling very fortunate being able to do this to this extent. And I think this is also one of those things that, fans obviously don't always know or see, but this is what a regular week for people like myself look like.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have been, talking about that, just like the extent of some of the recent injuries that you've revealed to everybody and whatnot. Like, how has that recuperation process been? Have you developed a deeper understanding of your body in this process? I would think there'd be certain frustrating parts of it. Can you talk about how that whole process has been?
Well, so I think that it's interesting to know that I think that a lot of people perceive that what I reveal to be as a current, and that is not the case. So what I spoke about was that until May, I want to say, I was dealing with an injury in my lower back and my hip region that I felt was going to permanently take me out because it wasn't showing any signs of improvement. And then for some reason, one day, I do a lot of dry needling. My physical trainer, Mike, hit the right spot. And it was as if everything just kind of collapsed in a good way. And ever since then, with the approach of taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back, it has been in a positive sense, building up in a good place where I feel stable enough to go back to squatting, go back to deadlifting, and my lower back pain actually kind of disappearing. And people I think it's not always the wrestling itself, but often it's the travel, it's the wear and tear, it's the lack of sleep, it's the hotel beds, it's the bus rides, it's the plane rides. That is very detrimental. On top of what you're doing in terms of physicality in the ring, that's the thing that gets to you, right? So are there frustrating parts? Absolutely, because I'm 37, I'm moving up to 40. I started training when I was 15, and before that, I was always a high-profile, I wouldn't say athlete, but I was someone who was very, very active. I was always very good at any sport that I tried. So there's a lot of wear and tear on my body, and, back when, I want to say when I was early 20s, mid-20s, the focus was very much on what's the heaviest weight I can pull? What's the heaviest I can squat? It's kind of more of a quote-unquote ego lifting or training kind of way, and you learn very quick not to do that because it serves no purpose. And the thought process becomes functional training. So what is functional for me is repping in extension, is full range of motion, is higher repetition levels, is more cardiovascular-based exercises versus building heaps of mass. That's obviously not going to happen anymore. Doesn't mean that I can't improve my physical stature or my physical appearance, which is what I've actually been doing for the past 4 months, because I switched up my nutrition coach and I switched up my training coach to be more aesthetically. So, there's still a lot of stuff that happens, but as far as that, injury part of my lower back is, I wouldn't say resolved, but it's stable, which is a very good change. And on top of that, I will always have, little hip problems or joint problems, knee problems, elbow problems, neck problems, because, those just they just flare up every once in a while.
Yeah, it's interesting the way you're talking about it, though, because, obviously you've been doing martial arts since you were a kid and everything like that, and it seems like you're almost, viewing the pro wrestling learning curve through, the lens of, that, martial artist as a lifestyle sort of ethos. Is that kind of the mentality?
Yeah, no, that is 100% correct. I've always approached wrestling as a variety of combined sports and obviously theatrics and combat sports, but also, of course, athleticism. So you have to train each component differently. You can't just train pro wrestling, in my book, to be a pro wrestler. You have to go to the gym and do what you do in the gym. And for me, it ties in doing certain form of gymnastics and certain forms of martial arts that I continuously implement in my, not just in my style, but in my training, in my functional training, because the conditioning aspect of it for me mimics a lot of what I do in the ring.
And that's interesting. So I was reading certain articles talking about how you've adapted your in-ring style to kind of mirror the Malakai Black character permutation as compared to some other, previous permutations, and just to the point of working martial arts. Has there been more of a pronounced focus on, say, submission grappling, jiu-jitsu, catch wrestling in the last bit?
Yeah, you nailed it on the head. Now, I wouldn't call myself a submission specialist or anything, but I have some of an extension understanding of more catch wrestling and grapple, certain grappling holds, and a little bit of jiu-jitsu. But I wouldn't say on any level, it is not a high level as I would say my Muay Thai is or my kickboxing is, other various forms of martial arts that I do. I felt that with the character of Malakai, basically myself, I couldn't be as flashy as I was in previous installments because the motivation was different. Where I felt with Malakai is more based on punishment and on grinding down and violence. Where I felt that previous installments were a little bit more flashy, still clearly, obviously, very based on martial arts, but this installment felt needed to go to the ground more. So you see me implement more reliant on knee bars or heel hooks, short arm scissors, offense towards ligaments and stuff like that.
Yeah, I would think there'd be some good people you could work with in that kind of context. For some reason, a guy like Josh Barnett popped up in my head, just being obviously a high-level MMA fighter, pro wrestler, and probably the heavy metal connection. Have you gotten to work with Josh Barnett at all?
So, funny enough, Josh has been trying to get me to his blood sport for a while now, but we've not been able to work out dates because whenever he asks me for a date, often my schedule is full, or I have something else on that particular day. I hope that it will manifest itself. I'm a big believer for what will be will be. But as far as just going around him and just work with him as him teaching me as a coach, I would love to do that too, because obviously he's a wealth of knowledge. He's an incredibly well-rounded individual. I think very highly of Josh Barnett, and obviously him and me have a lot of interest in music and lifestyle, of course. So I think Josh is an all-around great human being, and getting the opportunity to just work for him or with him would be great. Absolutely.
And you touch on something interesting there, just some of the outside opportunities that are now afforded, and I would think that would be exciting for you, because I was reading you were really into Hayabusa and Jushin Liger coming up, so aspects like the Forbidden Door must be pretty enticing, just that being more part of the pro wrestling parlance. I would think that there's certain quote-unquote dream matches out there that maybe you'd be eyeballing in that certain sense, or you could at least fantasize about them now and they seem tangibly real more than previous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've always wanted to wrestle Yuji Nagata. He was a massive inspiration to me. Tanahashi's always been one, and even though for me, he's always a standout because he blends the traditional Japanese heavyweight style with almost a more Western style pro wrestling. He has such a good blend. He's such a star. He's such a popular guy, and I find his style to be incredible in the sense that I feel like him and me would mesh very well, and that might be strange to some because I think people would people would think that I would go more for the Yuji Nagata's style wrestlers, but I think for that reason, someone as Tanahashi would work very well. even just the landscape of Japanese pro wrestling. It was interesting because last night I was in New York, and Marufuji was on the show, and I got to talk to him briefly. And the funny thing is, myself and Marufuji go way, way, way back to Germany and West Extreme Wrestling. At 16 karat, I was supposed to wrestle him when I was in my younger years, but I broke my foot the night before, so I couldn't do it. And we talked about that briefly, but he's a guy that I would still like. I would love to compete with. And like Naito is a guy that I would love to compete with, and even like now, but there's no so-called, we say shackles, but it's just a different style of wrestling. But like a guy like Kenta, with how he is now versus what we did in WB/NXT, would be very different. Would be very interesting. There's so much good talent around the world that is available for me right now. And like last night, I got the chance to step in the ring with a guy like Amazing Red. In that same company is a guy like Loki that's wrestling, but even closer to home, Eddie Kingston. Guys that have emulated a certain style of the Japanese wrestle culture style into their own blend of wrestling and using westernized or maybe American style wrestling into it. Having more traditional backgrounds, and a guy like Kingston comes from Chikara Pro, who obviously has more of a lucha style background, but he's made such a blend for himself by defining that Japanese love, the love for Japanese wrestling he has from the get-go, made him a standout even in Chikara. So guys like that will be interesting, and I'm thinking broader than the spectrum of New Japan, of course, when we talk about these things. But working or competing in Japan on a New Japan show itself would be a dream come true, because it's no secret that I started my journey in wrestling because of New Japan.
Yeah, and you touched on something interesting there, just with the WXW pass, and how there's that certain dynamic where you can wrestle somebody, but then years later you'll kind of run it back with them, and it's almost like you'd be wrestling a new permutation of them, just with the skills they've accrued, and same thing on your end there. Can you kind of talk to that dynamics? I know you wrestled Pac many years ago too, and everything like that. Is there that confluence of competitive familiarity, but it almost feels like a new thing because both of you have grown so much?
Yes, you can't compare what I did in 2008-9 with what I do in 2023, 22. That just doesn't exist, because you learn, you get different perspective, and I feel the blessing and curse of wrestling is that you're always learning, always finding new ways to do the same thing, and the lens of translation goes in so many ways. It's such a difficult sport to master, and every time I teach a seminar, for instance, often the reason why I enjoy teaching so much is while I'm teaching, I find new ways to approach the same subject. And I learn myself from teaching, the younger generations.
Yeah, very similar to the ethos of a martial artist to just teaching as a means of learning.
Yes, absolutely. It's 100% correct. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious though, because we've been talking about the Muay Thai and the stand-up kind of acumen. Who are some of the guys you've historically checked out? I know Duke Rufus commented Dutch style on one of your photos. In terms of guys you regularly watched early on in your fandom, who were you checking out? Were you on that early K1 kind of level, or what got you into it fandom wise?
It was even before that, man. Because I came from Netherlands. We had guys like Dick Vrij and Hans Nijman, Bob Schreiber, Rodney Ververes. Yuri Mes, Ron Post, Van der Vathorst, early grapplers, more pancrase orientated. Igor Johnson. They were just the Overeem brothers were already really well into their kickboxing, even though they were still young. They were around. Tyrone Sprong. There was all these talents around, man, and it was incredible to see what our country in terms of martial arts has done, and how what footprint we made in the martial arts scene. So it's always kind of strange, but also very, very humbling that even though not in the exact same vein as martial arts, but as a Dutch person that has transitioned from martial arts to pro wrestling, I'm always somewhat mentioned with these guys in terms of what I did for sports, or just basically the export product of that is the Netherlands. So it's always really cool to read certain articles that are written in the Netherlands where, they talk about Bob Schreiber and all the people he trained, and then my name is popped in there too. And it's very humbling to see that stuff, that despite my country not being very acceptance towards professional wrestling, they do acknowledge the work that's been put in.
Yeah, and I love that you're part of that Bob Schreiber lineage. I mean, I used to, watch a lot of the old Pride shows and stuff like that, and seeing him perform on there was definitely always a highlight, I felt.
It was funny because actually he came up a couple days ago because we were visiting my wife's family, and they brought up Sakuraba, and of course there's a very famous, infamous fight between Bob and Sakuraba where they banned the axe kick on the floor because of something that Bob did, and it's funny how those tie-ins are even known to what was an unknown part for me for almost 6 years before coming here, that people they know about these fights, they know about the Sakurabas and the Bob Schreibers and stuff like that, you know what I mean? So it truly is that martial arts is such a popular thing in the world, and especially the last few years with obviously the help of federations as UFC and Bellator and before that Pride and K1, you name it. And it's just incredibly cool to see how far that has come, and that there's ties between professional wrestling. Because even if you go back to Pancrase, there are elements of pro wrestling there, and it's incredible to see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's just such a great culture of that, just the tie-in with pro wrestling and mixed martial arts. I mean, I feel like a lot of that, informed each other to a degree. I mean, you look at one of the first ever MMA leagues called Shooto, just being the derivative of shoot as opposed to work.
Yep, I remember them. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then Tiger Mask kind of helming all that, so underscores the, wrestling connections that much more so. But yeah, there's a lot of guys that seem to, enjoy your work, and it seems like there's a mutual appreciation. I feel like that dynamic exists with Jonathan Haggerty, and I interviewed him many months ago, and he was like, oh yeah, I asked him if he joined the House of Black, actually, because he seems to be a fan of yours. I'm like, would you get into pro wrestling? Do a blackout, enter the ring kind of thing? And he seemed keen. What would your thoughts be on that?
I love Haggerty. There's a few talents that come of the United Kingdom, and I say this in a pool of talk about a country that has adapted to Muay Thai, and basically, in my opinion, from a European standpoint, brings out the best Muay Thai fighters, and I'm sure I'll get flack for that. But I think the United Kingdom has, apart from Thailand, has the best Muay Thai fighters in the world. Guys like Liam Harrison and indeed Haggerty. And, it might be biased because Liam is a friend of mine, and I might be biased because Haggerty is someone that I got a little bit acquainted with him, and I got acquainted because he's so damn good. If Haggerty at one point wants to transition to pro wrestling, I would be more, and I mean more than happy to coach him, because I feel he's one of those athletes that he's such a natural. If you see him move, and the veracity and the speed and the power that this guy possesses, and he's so young, you know what I mean? He's already doing one, and he's doing great in one championship. By the way, that promotion is incredible. One championship, I love. Currently with Glory, one championship is the one thing that I enjoy the most. It is an absolutely quote unquote hidden gem, despite being the biggest martial arts company in the world. If people have not jumped on it, do it now, because that is revolutionizing, and I love watching all the different. Yeah, the Muay Thai with the MMA gloves in the cage, and the grappling, and the straight MMA fights. I think one championship is one of the most interesting things to watch. But to get back on Haggerty, because I'm drifting off here. Again, if he ever wants to become a pro wrestler, I have no problem teaching him. He is more than welcome to train with us. I'd be honored.
Yeah, well, I'm glad I get to ask you about that because it was kind of, burning on my mind since I talked to Jonathan about it. He seemed pretty keen there, but I do want to be mindful of your time. I don't want to encroach too far beyond the allotted time we have here. I'm sure I could ask you questions for quite a while, but I do want to be mindful of your time and busy schedule. So to that point, is there anything you might want to add as a parting thought as we're wrapping up here?
Do I have a parting thought? I think that the blend between professional wrestling and martial arts has been blended, obviously, for a very long time. And I feel that I myself am one of the more modern torchbearers of that style and of bridging those two gaps. And of course, there's plenty more with me to do that. But I feel like I somehow have, I wouldn't say have the lead, but I'm in one of the more predominant places doing it. I will always carry a warm heart to martial arts, and I will carry a warm heart to professional wrestling forever. So yeah, man, it's interesting and crazy to see how far this ride in 22 years has taken me, and I obviously always hope for more to come. But if this is what it's going to be, then I look back at what I've done with a lot of pride and love in my heart.
Yeah, well, that's an awesome sentiment, but I feel like just the trajectory of House of Black towards those trios titles would indicate there's probably some more great chapters to be had in this story, but I do appreciate you coming on the show and giving some great insights, man. Definitely been a fan of your work for a while, and just great to get such great insights, and yeah, appreciate you coming on to reiterate, and you enjoy the rest of your day there, Malakai.
Appreciate it, man. Thank you very much for having me.